back, everyone. Today we're going to swap the carb out on old Blue here. We've yet to give it a name. People in the last video were leaving comments, so we'll continue that on until I get my kit saw. Once I get my kit saw, we'll finally settle on a name. But Larry, Moe, and Curly are definitely leading the pack so far. So 3 Stooges, 3 saws, built by me. I mean, it's kind of fitting, but we'll let it go for another video or two. So today, we're going to swap out a larger carb on our G366. So let's get this bar out of the way. I was pretty impressed with the way this cut straight out of the box. Now I know cherry's none too difficult to cut, but even during those noodling cuts, it didn't do too bad. You know, it didn't like having the bar buried. The noodles would wedge in the clutch, and this is what happens. They'd get jammed in between the clutch and the case, and just cause a little bit of extra friction, a little bit extra rubbing. You can remedy that by having the saw at a little bit more of an angle, and that makes smaller chips versus completely flat with the wood. Completely flat with the wood makes those big long ribbons we were doing, but it puts a pretty healthy load on the saw too. But today, like I said, set that there. Since we got our wood stove hooked up, it's a little bit warmer in the shop, don't need to wear my ratty sweater, is we'll get some baseline runs on our 366. See what kind of power it puts out bone stock, and then we'll swap on this here carb. Now this is a HD 18B. I'll come up a little closer and show you this one versus the stock one. So I'll get some caliper measurements and go over a few of the things we need to do. Obviously we need to swap these covers. So when you're doing these, you need to make sure that they're the same model. Well, that one's aftermarket, but I'm hopefully this is a Walboro copy, otherwise none of this will work. But, so, the carb we're going to swap on, our HD carb. Alright, so I'm back. Measured everything up with our calipers close as we could. Now, these aren't super crazy precise, but most of these were big enough measurements that it's going to make a difference, hopefully. So we've got stock carb. So we'll do our stock carb. All these measurements just be in millimeters. I already took time to convert them, and most people are familiar with millimeters when it comes to these carbs anyway. So on the choke side of the stock carb, 19 millimeter choke. Then the Venturi, 15.2 millimeter. That's the restriction in between the choke and throttle bores. Then our throttle bore is, what was that? 20.5 millimeter throttle. So on our larger carb, we have a 22.3 millimeter choke, a 16.7 Venturi, and a 20.5 throttle bore as well. So throttle bores on both of these same size. Venturi and choke is larger on our HD carb. So we'll have to swap these plates around and have to swap the bottom around. I think we might be able to make that choke rod. Just have to see. Have to see what we got to do. Might have to swap these choke rods around. You can see the angle's off a little bit, but I think that we can make that throttle rod work. But we'll have to see. And if we have to swap that choke rod out, luckily these are just the half rods. So we can pull this plate off, take the rod out, and then we just need to grind the flats a little bit larger to hold this plate. But we might also be able to get it to hit this anyway and make the choke still work. So we'll see what we end up with. But I'll get my Phillips, swap these plates around, make sure it is right, swap this plate around, make sure that's right as well. Good, nice clean working surface. And I'm leaving this one still intact. This is my spare carb off of our wild build. So make sure you guys do leave a comment. We're still naming. So far, Larry, Moe, and Curly are the 3 names in the lead. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll keep this going until I get my kit saw and we get a little bit further. This one, the Phillips. double check, make sure that these are the same. This is a genuine Walbro. I don't remember exactly what model. It's an eBay carb. It's supposedly all rebuilt. So hopefully it's good to go. That appears to be right. So I think we're going to be in business. Make sure to put the right screw with it. Get this all tightened back down. Everything lines up, everything fits, so we're going to hope that this will work. But these are the issues that you run into swapping carburetors. But if it works out, definitely a good thing. So we'll go to the metering side now. Get that piece out of the way. Now, up until this point, I've only done a few carb swaps. I really don't know a whole lot about these carbs, but I do plan on learning. I do have a few people giving me some pointers because I probably should study up on the terminology too. But we're going to make sure all these parts swap. That is one thing I can do. Unbolt parts and bolt them back on. But I really want to learn all of the different channels and circuits, the high speed, the low speed, how exactly it affects it. And now to flow the nitro fuel, we do need to open up the ports, do need to open up the holes, but we still need the needles to seal. That's a big thing with getting a nitro carb to work right. Right amount of pressure, right amount of sealing, and the right amount of flow. That way you can, especially for the cold start racing. It's a magic thing when you get everything just right. Alright, so it does look like everything is swapping over. So we're going to say that that's a clone copy of a Walbro. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the Walbro screws back into the Walbro carb. Because the Walbro screws are slightly shorter. So we don't want to bottom them out and damage the carb. As of now, we've got all of our clone pieces onto our genuine carb. So that part, so far, is doing okay. Typical me fashion, we'll just set all the extra parts out of the way and deal with them later. So we'll wrap all those up. Set them there. This too. This still has a limiter. Let me get my little pulling tool. So to pull limiters, just a drywall or sheetrock screw welded onto the end of one of those orange screwdrivers everybody seems to have in their shop. Just thread it into the hole, back it up a little bit. These might even be trimmed. So you can either do two ways. Do it just like I did there. Thread our screw all the way through the limiter and it'll push this plate out. But a lot of times if you look real close, you can line up this little tab with the little slots that are in these. Other times you can just continue to thread it in and it will push that plate out. But you want to be very careful because if you put too much force on, you can damage these screws. So we'll fully seat both of these screws, just real light, just like so. Just like so. And then we'll open them one full turn. So we'll start with our high. That's half. That's one. Same on the low. Half. One. So one full turn out from just lightly seated on both of these. And our carb is ready. But we haven't got any baseline runs on this. So we'll get this warmed up, put on the dyno, get some baseline runs. Then we'll come back, swap our modified carb, hopefully, onto it. And we can go from there. Alright, here's our clone G366. This is going to be our mild build. And we're going to get the stock baseline runs. Like I said, we only got, it looks like real close to a half a tank through it right now. So, we'll see what it does. I wouldn't even call this broke in. But we'll see what kind of power it makes. Bone stock right out of the box. Tune just about 13,000, maybe a little above. So we'll make a few pulls, get some baseline power, then we'll swap that carb out. Alright, not too bad, not too bad. Alright, so that was super surprising how close these two are. Let's take a peek at this carb, still a little warm, but let's see if we can get this carb to swap right on, or if we have to do some work. And then we'll take a look at the dyno results in a minute. Got our 8mm holding this piece on. Get that out the way. Get that out the way. If you go full throttle, you can flip the throttle rod off. Hey, not quite enough. We're still wearing our fuel. Let's just see how close this is to working with the choke. That's going to be the big one. Fuel line seems alright. Looks like we can pull this out real quick. There's just a couple push tabs holding this black piece on. You pinch them together, or you actually pry them apart. That's what it is. So you pry those apart. The handle will come off. And it looks like if we hook our throttle rod into our carb first, like so, I'm thinking that that'll work. I'm thinking. So we'll try that, slide that on, throttle rod's on, push our fuel line on. Alright, so we got full throttle. Just had to take that piece off. Fuel line's in. Okay, so we are going to have to do some work on the choke, but we do have full throttle and we have our ignition switch. So that'll work for now. Let's put everything back on. We just won't be able to use choke with this setup. So we will have to swap the choke rods out. But this will show us what kind of gain just swapping to a larger carburetor gets. Let's see if this works. I forgot our grommet. Whoops. Alright, let's see if it fires off. It'll probably take a little bit. See if that gets some fuel pumping. Give it just a little bit of prime. There we go. Not too bad. I am winded. It did take some priming, but we'll turn the idle up a little bit. Give it a little bit more fuel on the high side for now. We'll see what that does for us. But we'll get this on the dyno. So our choke's not functional. That's why I took a few extra pulls to prime it up and a little squirt. But this will do to get some actual dyno numbers on a carb swap alone. So I'll get this strapped to the dyno, see what it puts out. Alright, so we got our carb swap all done. It's still warm from last time. So I'll dial in the tune to about the same 13.2 that it was. And we'll see how the big carb acts.
So what's happening here really shouldn't be possible, but I'll let you watch me try and struggle and tune this thing in a little bit longer, and then at the very end you'll see what I did wrong here.
Well, that was rather disappointing. I was hoping to get this thing to run and actually make some power, but even from that half pull we had, as soon as it got to the low speed, it was not liking anything. You could hear it fall on its face, made no power even though it was spinning RPM. So, hate to do it, but we'll have to come back to this one and try a fresh kit. Maybe I'll have better luck with an actual aftermarket carb. I was hoping that a rebuilt OEM was going to be the way to go. Evidently, it wasn't. The only other thing I'm going to check real quick is the fuel line. And it sure looks alright. You know what? I might have forgot the impulse in my haste to get this done. Let's pull this back off real quick, see what I did. hey, I figured out what we did. We can't pump any fuel without the impulse hole. So, I will say that's about the first time. But, so you do need to add an impulse hole. So we'll come back, we'll add the impulse hole, and then we'll get the final dyno runs on this. But, you see, they can run, they can cut. Well, not very good, it runs out of fuel. Not too much. So maybe this carb will be the ticket. But we just need to add this impulse hole right here and tie into the top. Don't know how I overlooked that to begin with, but we are only human. We do make mistakes. But hey, it did run, pulled fuel, sat there idled, got the video of it. But we'll look at the actual power graph of these two stock saws. I'll mod this carb and we'll come back fully ready to rock. I'll make sure it's good to go this time. All right, here's our stock carb. This is the impulse channel, the impulse hole. And you can see it's missing in our other carb. So I'll have to drill a hole there and get our impulse hooked up. Then this one can fuel right. Do you want to apologize? Complete oversight on my part for not noticing that it needed an impulse. I don't know where I thought it was getting it from, but I guess I just thought it was already there. So when you do swap carbs, you do need to make sure you have an impulse to actually pump your fuel. So apologize for that, but we'll see what it takes to actually get the choke functional and to get the impulse functional and actually pumping fuel. But until then, we'll look at the graph of these two stock saws. I couldn't believe how close they actually were. So here's our power run of both of our stock 366s. The red line is our first one that we're turning into our race saw. Blue line is the one we actually ran about a half a tank through it. They're actually cutting some wood, so it has a little bit of run time. But if you look at them, power output almost identical. You're not going to feel that. Now this red one peaks a little bit lower, but it's also tuned a little bit lower. So if we had that wound out, the curve will probably stretch and flatten out a little bit, just like this blue one. But you can see power's there. That's why it has this little bit of point here. That's where it was cleaning up from a 4-stroke, because we were a little bit richer in that. And our blue run, we had dialed in a little bit above 13, probably 13.2 or so. That's why it stretches out, reaches out. But you can see almost identical power. I was super surprised to see them this close, but it is what it is. And I still can't believe that I forgot to add the impulse hole to actually pump fuel. So you got to hear what it sounds like when a carb's not pumping fuel, and I'm just glad it wasn't something more. So hopefully you enjoy and you learned what not to do when you're swapping your carb. But we'll come back, we'll get that impulse hole drilled, get actually fueling, and let me know how much power you think swapping the carb is actually going to gain when it can fuel correctly. So leave a comment, let me know what you think we're going to get. And as always, thanks a lot, everyone.